Welcome to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Join us as we dive into the world of endurance sports, exploring everything from nutrition to training and how these elements shape your everyday life, both on and off the race course. Hosted by Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian specializing in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. We're here to share insights and real-world advice to help you thrive on your journey. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin, and I am here with Coach Katie. Today is episode 69. And it is going to be a discussion on the use of caffeine in training and racing. And so we thought that this was a timely topic, selfishly, of course, because it is a conversation that I had with Katie about my own training and my own nutrition plan. So we have been working together now for probably over a year now, well, definitely over a year. And I've noticed that my weight had been increasing lately, and I couldn't figure out kind of why. It's like it was probably the big tray of cookies at Christmas time and the big apple pie that none of my kids ate when I hosted them for Christmas. So, of course, I had to take care of that. And but we're not quite sure if that was the main culprit. So I started looking at all of the different aspects of my life. And, I've always been kind of a rough sleeper, so I have a hard time kind of getting in enough hours and quality of sleeping. My wife has been noticing some additional snoring lately. And so I've been trying to figure out what's been going on. And so this is the question that I posed to Katie was, do you think that I'm taking in too much caffeine? It is common for every day for me to take some caffeine when I first wake up, just a cup of hot tea or whatever, and I'll take in a bottle of pre-workout for my morning workout, and then again another bottle of pre-workout for my evening strength session. And so the question became, can I be taking in too much? Does this have an adverse effect on weight loss goals? And, can you start to see some weight gain from the caffeine? And so we thought that this was a pretty timely topic to talk about since we were having this conversation just between the two of us. So we thought that it might help you because I am a firm believer in the use of caffeine in race strategies. It is a huge performance enhancer, and we'll talk about why that is the case later on in the podcast. So we want to thank you guys for tuning in today. Like I said, this is episode 69. And so let's get in some quick housekeeping rules because the last few episodes have been really long. And so I've got a timer sitting up here, which I did not click. So now it's clicked.
We're going to try and
keep us under control here. And so just very, very quickly, if you're enjoying the content that we're coming out with for the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, please, we hope that you'll consider leaving a review and a comment on wherever it is that you're consuming your podcast content from. We believe strongly from day one that we were not going to monetize this podcast, which means that we have no sponsors, we have no ads, we have nobody to be beholden to. So we wanted to be able to come to you clean and pure and talk about topics that we care about and not try and sell you mattresses and supplements. So please consider leaving a review. It helps people like you find us as well, and those are greatly, greatly appreciated, and we thank you for that. If you would also consider joining the private Facebook group, it is the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group. We are building out this group. We have been from kind of like day one. But as we build this out, we're pushing out some additional content there, links to some of these companion blogs that both of us are writing, reels and little short excerpts from various episodes that we feel are big takeaways from an entire episode. We're pushing these out to this community. And so we think that it's a valuable resource for you. It allows you to connect to other listeners of the podcast. We can all learn and grow with each other. You can also have easier contact with us. You can start to ask Q&A questions, and if we find something that might be of interest to the group, we'll turn it into an entire podcast episode. So we hope that you'll consider joining. We are active coaches, and we are taking on athletes onto our individual rosters. So if you are interested in coaching services, you can reach out to Coach Katie at fuel2run.com. Katie does run plans as well as dietetic plans for any of the sports. I tend to focus mainly on just training plans, so there's no nutrition counseling from me. So I do triathlon and then the single sport training plans as well. So you can go to tabularosoracing.com and you can check me out there. Both of our websites have a plethora of information on there, coaching philosophies, videos, blogs, all kinds of stuff. So you can really kind of do your due diligence before you decide who you'd like to reach out to. So we greatly appreciate that time that you spend. So let's go ahead and we'll get started.
Maybe we'll start with what is caffeine. I think most people kind of know what it is. I think most people know it's a stimulant, right? That's kind of a basic thing, but what is it actually doing in the body? So let's just kind of start there.
Yeah. I think that we can just talk about what caffeine is, how the body is utilizing this, and then we can kind of go into the reasons why we would use it for performance and for racing, strategies that you would need to consider if you do decide to use it, because it can either be a performance enhancer or it can end your day really, really quickly.
Yeah,
there's no middle ground to caffeines.
Let's talk about some of the side effects. So I think we will mention sleep, although I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail there. I'll just provide a few resources people can jump to. I'll mention them, and then you can also look in the show notes, we'll include some things people can check out when they really want to dive into how it might affect sleep. Because I'm not a sleep expert. I do talk with people, obviously, because I talk with you about sleep. I mean, I think as a dietitian, it's holistic, stress, sleep, all of that, is very important. So I do talk about all of that. But when it comes to like the science of it and the deep dive into that, that could be a whole thing on its own. So we'll just kind of mention that. So what is caffeine? So I mentioned it's obviously a stimulant, but basically the way it works is that, so there's this molecule called adenosine, and that is like the sleepiness molecule. So that kind of throughout the day, we actually accumulate this adenosine and it kind of starts to build up and build up and build up. And then we go to sleep at night, the actual act of sleeping kind of reduces it. So all day long, adenosine is like building up in our body. Just think of it like that. Otherwise, it gets complicated. Basically, what caffeine does is it kind of like blocks or like doesn't allow the adenosine to go to the receptors to help to make us sleepy. So it blocks that sleepiness sort of situation that we get. So that you can imagine if you have this molecule that's making us feel sleepy and caffeine's kind of blocking that, just to keep it simplistic, that's going to help you feel less fatigued, maybe more energetic. Yeah. Maybe you're going to be able to get through that evening workout a little bit easier. I know that's hard for me, those late afternoon, evening workouts, because probably for this very reason, I'm starting to feel a little bit sleepy. And so that's essentially what caffeine is doing. There's other things that it might be doing when we talk about endurance exercise benefits. There may be other things that are going on with it in terms of how it may help release fat from storage a little bit. There's not a huge benefit there, but there may be some for certain individuals. So, but essentially that's the mechanism. Yeah. Do we want to dive into dosing or?
Well, let me ask one question for you. And this is just, if you don't know the answer off the top of your head, it's perfectly fine. But the question that I've got is adenosine. How is it related to cortisol? Because I know that when we wake up in the morning, our cortisol levels tend to be at its highest. And throughout the day, cortisol levels start to...
I see what you're saying.
And then we work out and there's a spike in cortisol there, and then it starts to decline again, which is usually why we start to feel kind of like that afternoon drag, is where those cortisol levels are really starting to get to lower levels. So the question that I've got is, does adenosine and cortisol have a relationship?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. Cortisol obviously helps us kind of be awake, and it's a stress hormone, but it's a very important one. So it's not like people kind of give cortisol a bad reputation because when it is higher than it should be, or it's you're getting a cortisol boost like in the evening, that's not good. But like I don't know if it has like a direct relationship, but you almost have this converse thing where in the morning, you have this boost of cortisol, and then at night that cortisol is going down, and that's when adenosine's starting to get a little bit higher. I would say there's probably more of a melatonin, maybe like there's more of a which is not really I don't that's a good question how adenosine may be related in the whole grand scheme of things with the hormone melatonin and cortisol, like how those are all and interacting
Yeah.
together. I don't know if there's like any sort of when one's high, the other's like low because it's blocking it or something. But there are these like many hormones, kind of these diurnal things that are happening where one might be higher and then throughout the day, like cortisol's lower and then, coming lower. And then you have maybe adenosine and then also like melatonin are starting to rise in the evening so that we get sleepy and want to sleep. And so there isn't like it's an interaction. I don't know if they directly impact each other, but you have like if you
Hmm.
were to chart it out throughout the day, you would see these like ups and downs of these hormones kind of happening throughout the day, which is kind of fascinating, right? How our body has these cycles, almost like these daily
Yeah.
cycles of hormones that go up and down to help us, we either be awake or be sleepy so we can sleep. So, that is a good question I'll look into. And if I can find anything that talks about all of the
Yeah.
interactions, like a article or something, I will add it into the show notes. But I don't know, how they all interact together. I just know it's kind of this diurnal, like almost cycle of hormones that's just, it's all pretty fascinating. So
Okay.
yeah, let me
I was
write
just
it down.
curious. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about dosing.
Yeah, so for dosing, the optimal dose, and this is just kind of when I was looking in the research because I wasn't sure. Most people drink a cup of like coffee or they have a cup of tea, or
Mhm.
sometimes it's hard to know exactly how much caffeine. Believe it depends on the coffee. Like if it's a really dark coffee or like a Starbucks kind of coffee, it might be like 300 milligrams in one dose. Of like 16-ounce coffee or even maybe less than that for 300 milligrams because it's pretty potent versus like tea may only be 50 milligrams, maybe to 100. So it depends on what
Mhm.
you're consuming. But it's 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram. So if
Mhm.
you weigh about 150 pounds, it's 75, roughly 75 kilograms. This is just an example of sometimes I just use 150 pounds because that's an easy mathematical one. So that would be what, like 3 times 75, maybe 250,
Yeah, so I
225,
built a little
250.
calculator in a spreadsheet
Yeah.
this morning because I was curious
Oh, you're
just
curious. You're like,
on
I'm
my
looking
own.
this up.
So I was like, well, how
Yeah.
much caffeine should I be taking in? So if you're 150 pounds, that is about 68 kilograms. And so your caffeine range would be somewhere between 204 milligrams to 408. So that's using
Oh,
the
wow.
dosing of three 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram up to six, uh, up to six. So
Okay.
that's the
Well,
calculation.
yeah.
So I did mine. I'm not going to tell my weight because it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you don't wanna
But
be yeah. You
it
figured
looks
it
like
out, yeah.
my range of caffeine is between 346 and
Mm,
691,
that's a lot. That's a lot,
which
those
is
600.
mind blowing because I
Yeah,
know
that
that
seems like
like
a
my
lot.
pre-workout mix is anywhere between 300 to 330
Mm,
milligrams of caffeine. So
right.
honestly, my pre-workout is lower than the minimum range for my dosing.
Yeah. And I wonder too, and it's like in the this is yeah. I mean, I
But
think
taking in
sometimes
almost 700 milligrams of caffeine in a
right.
dose, your head would explode. There's
Right, yeah,
absolutely,
that's
it
true.
just does not make a whole lot of sense
I mean,
on
it
how
is
your
kind of
body
like
would
I
react to
think
that.
what this is probably well, it says 60 minutes before exercise. Yeah. So I would say for some people, maybe the high end of that is not real like gonna be a good idea. Like depending on like if you're kind of like I'm trying to say this,
If
in a
you're a
way like
smaller person, then
yeah, if you're a smaller
it
person or
makes
smaller
sense.
boned or just kind of smaller
Yeah.
versus like a taller, more muscular, larger person, that's going to be like so for me, maybe the 6 milligrams still going to be high because but it might be more realistic, something I would consume, maybe not necessarily all before my event, but maybe throughout the day. I don't know. So
Yeah.
it's not, yeah, I think it really depends. So giving that sort of blanket statement dose is, you just, I think people have to remember this is just kind of like based off the research, but it's not really individualized. So none of,
Right.
when we're
Yeah.
looking at things like this, you have to really individualize it for yourself and figure out, okay, what is my optimal dose? What's the amount I can take that kind of helps me wake up, feel ready for my workout and doesn't like leave me with a bunch of the side effects we're going to talk about here in a second. So
Hmm.
yeah, just kind of figuring that out. And then I think what we'll dive into is like, okay, that might be what you would take in. Maybe 3 milligrams per kilogram be like a safe
Yeah.
starting bet. And then what would you take in during, and how would you space that out? Because a lot of athletes do both take the caffeine in before and then during their event. So
Yes.
like what would be like a protocol you could consider? How would you maybe practice that and try to figure out how to do that in your event? Just like anything, I recommend practicing the caffeine intake like during training, just like you would practice your fueling, because I have worked with people that have made the mistake of not doing that, and then they took in one of those Morton caffeinated gels. Every gel they took was caffeinated.
No. Yeah.
And this was before working with me, so you can't blame. I would have been like, "That's
Yeah.
a bad idea, don't do that." And then she came and she's told me about, she was working with me after the fact, and she's like, "Yeah, I felt terrible, like, like just had all these sort of side effects and didn't feel
Yeah.
good, jittery, kind of things like that." So I was like, "Ooh, that's, don't do that. Don't take every gel you take should not be caffeinated because you might end up, over the course of the entire event having way too much caffeine."
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's just kind of like the dosing, that's just like maybe in the morning and then if you're actually doing an event when you're taking caffeine during, then that may be a separate discussion we can have. But let's actually dive into like the performance piece. Like
Okay.
how does it improve
Well, yeah,
performance?
before
And
before we
yeah.
go to performance, let's talk about a little bit about tolerance. I think that
Okay.
that's going to have a significant impact to the dosages that you're going to
Mhm.
use before we get into like
Well,
strategies and like
yeah.
performance enhancers, because there was a day where my wife and I were going to go out for a hike, and I was just like, here, let's just have a little bit of caffeine, um, and so I made us both like pre-workout bottles, and it had like three
Oh,
hundred
okay.
300 milligrams of caffeine in each of those bottles,
That's a
and
lot
she
for.
took a couple sips off of it, and she said like her skin was crawling, and she was just like, she just was not
Oh.
feeling well. But
Does
she
she not
she
usually drink
no, she drinks a
coffee?
cup of coffee like every single morning.
Interesting, yeah.
And so, but I can drink multiple bottles of this thing and just like fall asleep with no problem. Now,
Right.
you brought up the thing is like, okay, well, it's not about the speed in which you fall asleep, but the quality of the sleep in which you're getting is really
Mhm.
important for us. But my dad was the same way. My dad could drink a whole pot of coffee right before bed and have no problem, just go right on to
Right.
sleep. So, do you think that there might be some kind of genetic disposition to caffeine tolerance, or is it just through the frequent use of caffeine that we build up a tolerance to it?
Uh,
And so whether it
no.
affects its efficacy.
Right.
So
There's a lot of research on, like, genetic. I didn't put a lot of that because that's sort of a deeper
yeah, it's a
dive, but
whole yeah.
there are different genes that either, like, basically increase how quickly caffeine is broken down. So some people are slow metabolizers, some people are fast metabolizers, and you kinda like, I'm guessing maybe for you, maybe you're, like, a fast metabolizer of caffeine, but that still doesn't mean that, you're still gonna have some in your system at night, so I would say
Right.
still it's probably gonna be a problem, but, like, your, half-life might be, like, 6 hours where mine, because I just am so sensitive to I can drink quite a bit of coffee, but I think that's just because I've tolerated it over time. What I did one time, go through, we'll talk a little bit about this, but where I did a withdrawal from caffeine and it was rough, and then I started drinking again and I was very sensitive at the beginning and then it built up. So you definitely build up a tolerance. It's like like many, stimulants, actual drugs that, people can take. There is like
Yeah.
a buildup of tolerance. So that's part of it too. And then maybe the way our half life is, if you're one of those people that are like me, if I cannot have caffeine after like maybe noon, otherwise it does impact my sleep. And if I make the mistake like I did a month or so ago where I was drinking this like turmeric chai tea that I should have known because it was chai and I don't know what I was thinking. I just thought it didn't have caffeine and it did, and I drank it in the afternoon and I couldn't sleep that night and it was like, "What was it?"
Uh,
And it was like, "Oh, it's this like little small amount of caffeine in this tea." So for me, I'm very sensitive to it with sleep, and that's probably gotten worse as I've gotten older, but so I'm assuming without looking at the genetics of it, because I may have had a bunch of genetic tests. I can't remember if I did the caffeine, looked into that or not, but I'm guessing I'm a slower metabolizer of it. But it's kind of a combination thing. And there may be genes that affect how we react to it. The other thing I was thinking is commonly, and this is just a sort of not something that I researched much into this, but sometimes people who have like ADHD will find that they drink caffeine and it actually relaxes them and they feel
mm,
sleepy.
yep.
So
I've
I
heard
don't
the
know.
same.
That's like a neurological something kind of interesting going on because obviously like medications that any stimulants kind of act differently with those individuals and help them maybe be more calm or be able to focus. So that is interesting thought, but I don't want to dive into that too much. That's a rabbit hole of a
Right.
whole different discussion, but it is something to think about if you're finding that you're taking that if somebody's finding that they're taking the caffeine and it's actually causing like drowsiness or just like calmness maybe like it's
Hmm.
not having the same effect that it normally has on other people. Maybe there's something there. I don't know. For me, it's interesting because it does help me focus, but it does sort of jazz me up. So I don't know. And I've never had caffeine and been like, I feel like I'm gonna sleep. So
Maybe you
I
have
don't
the
know.
AD without the HD. So
I don't think I have the hyperactive piece
so
maybe. So
but
I
the
don't
the
know what I
reason
have.
yeah, the reason that I kind of wanted to bring that up is that, it's common for people to get out on social media and, share advice from people that are asking questions. And the reason that I wanted to bring this up is that no caffeine strategy is going to be the same across
Uh-huh.
individuals. So there's many different factors that you have to consider when somebody is coming to you. Maybe you're a little bit more experienced in the sport and you're kind of like a mentor to a younger person in there just starting out their journey, and they're asking you questions about caffeine. Keep this in mind that there's a lot of things that you have to consider is, the tolerance and, how your body processes it. So just coming up with like, oh, this is what I use, it might be a good place to start, but you have to make sure that you tell this person, hey, this is something that is experimental. Just like
Mhm.
nutrition strategies for races, this is something that is highly individualized and something that would work for somebody, which they would have no adverse effects on, could be a completely different reaction to somebody else that's fairly similar. So
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
was the
And I
reason
think
that I wanted to bring this up.
it probably depends on if you drink caffeine on a regular basis, like, drink coffee, I mean, or have caffeine in that sense of coffee and tea, every morning versus you're not a coffee drinker, you don't really have much caffeine, like, you're gonna have to be a little more cautious as you add it in because you don't know maybe what you already can tolerate. For me, like, before races, I generally sometimes will use, like, a pre-workout that's more of, like, a vasodilator, like, almost like beetroot, and so that
Hmm.
jazzes me up quite a bit, and then also, like, the caffeine, just the regular coffee I drink, and then I'll take the caffeine in during my event at certain points during like, strategically. So I don't actually increase the caffeine intake generally before races, but, some people might find that having a little bit more helps, but you probably don't wanna go from drinking, like, 2 cups of coffee to taking, like, a huge pre-workout with a huge dose or, like, caffeine
Hmm.
tablets or something that you're not used to. So you definitely have to like it's definitely individual and you have to trial it out and figure out what works best. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So let's talk
Yeah. Let's
a
get
bit
into
about like what
performance.
is the so obviously the big one we kind of mentioned already would be that because it's sort of decreasing that adenosine. There maybe other effects on just, like, the way our brain is perceiving, fatigue. There's, like, that increased bit of alertness because it is, like, a stimulant there too. So it's, like, kind of providing that sense of alertness, awakeness, decreased perceived, exertion and exercise. So it's It's just during exercise, if you use it strategically, kind of before and during, it's just helping you feel like the exercise is easier, right? That you're not getting as tired, especially for some of those long endurance events. There is potentially an effect of preserving glycogen, so
Mm.
that might be just related to how having caffeine can stimulate a little bit more fat release of fatty acids into circulation to be used as fuel. And so it's not like a huge, like a big boost
Yeah.
where it's going to make a giant difference. It's just a potential thing that might be a little bit of a boost in some conditions, and likely those like longer endurance based exercises where when you're doing something really high intensity, the intensity is just too high to really be burning much fatty acids anyways. For you're burning mostly carbs, and so that sort of event maybe wouldn't benefit as much as like maybe an Ironman or a longer distance, like longer than a marathon, in terms of that,
Hmm.
glycogen preserving. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, but it might be a little bit. And then there's also like an increased release of calcium. So calcium ions kind of provide like that neuromuscular stimulus, so, like, kind of when it's like that signaling to
Hmm.
the muscles to contract and keep going, and so maybe there's, like, a benefit there of, like, boosting that a little bit of, like, okay, not only are you reducing fatigue, but you're maybe, like, helping stimulate that muscle contraction so you can kinda push through a little bit of that uncomfortable feeling towards the end of a race potentially, or, as you're starting to get muscular fatigue. So those are the main benefits of caffeine. So you could see how I think the biggest benefit is if you're in the middle of especially a longer distance event, maybe anything from like a half marathon to obviously like an ultra distance event where you're not sleeping for days. This benefit of
Yeah.
caffeine of reducing your sleepiness and making you feel more alert is going to be a good thing. And maybe perceived exertion. I
Yep.
know for my marathon in last May, I didn't sleep well. The few nights and then the night before I got 2 hours of sleep. And so caffeine helped me that during that race, I took in more caffeine gels than I normally would. I knew that was maybe a little bit of a risk, but I knew going into it, I didn't take one every time I took one, but I took a few more caffeinated gels than I would normally have planned because of that, because I knew that I was going to be pretty tired going in and my rate of perceived exertion for that race was gonna be higher, so I was gonna I knew and it was true, like, as I was starting that race, like, within the first hour, I was already starting to feel, like, some of that mental fatigue of,
Mm.
like, because I hadn't been sleeping, so all that adenosine's probably high, it's just not a good I don't I don't advise that, obviously, that happens sometimes, and so this is where caffeine can be helpful, and I took in gel earlier than I was planning on, and it helped me get through that race and kind of keep that fatigue a little bit lower that was starting to build up from just not sleeping, And that was
Yeah.
probably the biggest struggle I had during that race was just feeling tired early in. Normally I feel pretty good for the first couple hour and a half to 2 hours. I'm doing okay. I think that's one of the benefits I've definitely noticed with caffeine and exercise. And so sometimes just strategically how you take it during your race is a big thing, like I mentioned, because it's kinda keeping that fatigue lower, but we don't wanna have the side effects of, like, jittery or anxiety, which isn't gonna be very helpful during a race. You maybe wanna take it that 1 hour before you start, and then you almost wanna, like I would s I would encourage people to sort of strategically have the caffeine more towards the middle, and then maybe more towards the end, so kind of strategically having it spaced
Okay.
out. So, like, not I wouldn't take it first thing when you get out on the course because at that point you're probably feeling pretty good. And you run the risk of taking it too early and then having that dose before you start and having the jittery and anxiety feeling.
Hmm.
What's probably most beneficial is waiting until towards the end when you're feeling a little bit fatigued, right? When you're starting to get that fatigue. So maybe strategically, like in a marathon, maybe halfway through, and then maybe again when you're at mile 20 to 22, when you're in that last part, which is so hard. I always I I didn't always take one halfway through. I usually would wait until like that very end of my race when I was
Yeah.
very tired and I would take it strategically then because it would be like I could notice this boost of um energy and this kind of like, wow, I feel so much better just from the caffeine. And it's a noticeable thing. I think most people have experienced that. So, kind of
Yeah.
being strategic about when you take it. And that's why I think it's helpful if you're doing some training runs to be like, okay, I'm going to try caffeine at different times and see when it helps me the most and what dose. The other thing you want to look at is making sure that the gel that you're taking has a good dose that you think would be beneficial. So it's like generally anywhere from like 20 milligrams to like 100 or even like maybe 150 milligrams in some of those gels. So you just want to also be aware of the gel you're taking, how much it is. Don't take something like this
Right.
huge high dose that you're not used to. So that's where it all is helpful to kind of practice. I would encourage people to do before and during their race. I don't have any specific because this is so individual. I don't know if I have any specific.
Right. Yeah, so what I did was I'm a heavy user of caffeine. And so when I did Ironman Florida 70.3 this past December, my strategy was I had my normal cup of hot tea in the morning while I ate my breakfast. I didn't start the caffeine feed until I got on the bike. And I consumed it from the moment that I started pedaling all the way through the run. And so I had caffeine in both of my nutrition bottles on the bike, and then I had caffeine in both of my flasks that I carried with me on the run because I carry all of my nutrition with me. I rarely take anything from the course just because my body is different. And so you raise an interesting scenario that I might want to experiment with, and that is to, if I'm taking 2 bottles with me on the bike, maybe put caffeine in only 1 bottle and make sure that I have the sequence in which I'm going to consume my bottles correct and start with the non-caffeinated bottle first. So that way, when I get to the halfway point of the bike and I'm starting to consume from the second bottle, which has the caffeine in it, then that's when the dosing starts. But, there's an interesting scenario that I kind of want to experiment with. So this is great. This is great feedback for
Yeah, I
me.
almost wonder if you take it too early, like,
Yeah,
if you're
does it
taking it all throughout,
is there
does
any
it
kind of
yeah.
sabotaging that's taking place if
Well,
you consume it too early?
I think
But
you're
I
gonna
don't
get that
know.
benefit. Maybe. That would be interesting to experiment with because I think you would because you're not super fatigued quite yet early on,
Right.
and so taking it later, when you actually kind of need that little boost, you might notice that more versus if you're taking it the entire time, it's hard to say, is it benefiting you just because overall you're still feeling energized and you never, maybe you delay that feeling of fatigue? I don't know. Like, it just yeah, that's an interesting
It could be a different
thought.
strategy though for a full Ironman because you
Yeah.
know you can be experiencing some fatigue getting on the bike because you just
Yeah.
swam 2.5 miles, and it depends on how intense that swim was, whether it's
Right.
a swim with a current or if you're swimming in a lake. Was it just particularly hard conditions? So for a strategy for something like that, you might want to consider still delaying the consumption of caffeine, but maybe just take the smaller dose at the beginning of the bike and in the form of like a caffeinated gel or something to kind of wipe out the effects that you experienced during the swim and kind of maybe just start that process, but starting it at a lower dose and saving the higher doses for deeper into the bike. That might
Right.
be a realistic scenario to consider.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So it's just kind of that's where I think it's just about experimentation, right? Just,
Absolutely, yeah.
just trying it out in different scenarios and kind of seeing. Yeah, it depends, I think also, yeah, like you said, on the length or duration of the event. Kind of and you also have to think about, I guess in that sense, like, an Ironman may take a good portion of the day. So you're pushing
Mhm.
the caffeine later. Then it kind of gets into like you know, I guess after a race, I don't sleep that well anyways, so maybe it doesn't matter,
A
because it's just
After
that
my
one day,
Ironman
like
races, I never had a problem, like, going to
Oh,
sleep,
really?
and I
Yeah.
consider yeah,
Okay. Sometimes
you're
I'm
just
so
so burnt
jazzed.
by the end of that, so
Oh, really? Yeah, I don't know, I can't remember the one time I did, like, the half Ironman. I just know, like, even after a marathon, I'm exhausted, but I'm, like, super it's, like, the adrenaline or whatever. I
yeah,
don't
it
think it's
wears
even the
off really
caffeine I
quick.
took. Okay, well, you're lucky. I just say I'm just, like, jazzed. Well, I don't know. Sometimes I'll
But
sleep.
the thing
Okay,
that
but
I really want to make a point of, since we're talking about performance, is once you start the caffeine process, you cannot stop. You cannot stop feeding the caffeine monster once you start on that race, because the collapse that you will experience once that
oh yeah.
caffeine has been exhausted out of the system is going to make you feel worse than if you never even started it.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's
you
probably
know,
true.
you
So maybe
need
delaying it is
yeah,
a good strategy
delaying
for
it
some
might be
people.
good, but if once you start, you have to be on top of it, and still feeding it a little bit just to keep from the crash, because the
Mhm.
crash is horrendous. So
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because you do have this. That's the thing with caffeine is at times. I guess I didn't put this in here, but there is like a peak and kind of it lasts for a certain point period of time, and then it like the half life piece. It's kind of starting to the effectiveness of it starting to go down. After a
mhm.
certain point. So it's kind of got like this peak, and then kind of starting to go down, and then it crashes. So you do wanna yeah, that's definitely a good point, is if you start to the caffeine, don't I guess my suggestion wouldn't be to do the opposite and, like, have the caffeine and then have a bunch of caffeine early in your race and then not take it in again later, because I think that would be a
Yeah, I
bad
wouldn't do
strategy.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but I think, if you take it in the
It'll put the
you could
peak at
take
the
it in
wrong point in the race.
yeah, and another strategy is, like, if you're taking in gels, like, to kinda take in a little bit of caffeine every hour or so, so almost like alternating between a non-caffeinated gel and a caffeinated gel, and a non-caffeinated
Mhm.
gel or something like that, some sort of combination, or if you have, like, gummies, taking in a few gummies with caffeine along with something else and kinda doing that every time, so you're just kind of slowly, like, almost like dripping in the caffeine all throughout the race. That's one strategy, or do what like I do and wait until I'm starting to get fatigued to get that boost of like
Yeah.
that helpful boost at the end, towards the end or middle to the end of the race. So it kind of depends on your preference there, and maybe doing a little bit of experimenting with both, during both different types of strategies like that during your training to kind of see, well, what's going to give me the most like benefit? Like how is
Yeah.
caffeine going to help me the most? Is it better to have it a little bit all throughout or just towards the end? So that's what I would suggest. But
Yep.
because we mentioned the sleep piece, let's just kind of
Yeah.
dive into some of the side effects. We've already mentioned that over arousal, like jittery and anxiousness, but the insomnia piece, or the sleep, the way it disrupts sleep, is one I think we just wanna mention. And what I'll say is, like, when Justin reached out to me about it, I did send that clip of, Matthew Walker, so he's a
Yeah.
sleep expert. He wrote the book, Why We Sleep, and the book I haven't read, I have to be honest. The reason being because I already struggle with sleep, and I've heard him talk, and whenever he talks about it, it makes me feel like I'm gonna die. You know what I mean? Not really, but it's like it's like, "Oh, well, you need sleep to prevent Alzheimer's, and sleep is all these things that sleep does, and what happens when you don't sleep, and what's happening in your body." And it causes me more anxiety, honestly, thinking about, like, when I'm having a poor night of sleep, how that's impacting me, and then it almost becomes a problem in its own. So I've only listened to him talk quite a bit, but I haven't read the book because mostly I'm just like, I think worrying about sleep isn't gonna help me sleep
Right.
better,
Right.
but he's a good resource, and there's others out there like that. But he essentially, when we're talking about the adenosine receptors, so those are helping us get sleepy, caffeine is disrupting that. So if you have that, chemical that's kind of not, you're sort of reducing that adenosine through having caffeine, that's gonna potentially make it harder to fall asleep. In your case, like, you're still falling asleep. So caffeine is also, and I don't know, like, if it's a mechanism through, like, I think it does have to do with, like, adenosine and how that helps us sleep, but there's also some mechanisms with caffeine and how, our brain is, like, going into, like, the deep sleep and those slow wave. The brain is at
Mm.
night, there's all these things happening when we're sleeping, and we get this, like, deep restorative slow wave sleep. So what's essentially happening when we have caffeine, and this is across the board for most people, so a lot of people do report, like, "Yeah, I have coffee, I can have an espresso, and I'm gonna be able to go to sleep." At dinner, I'll have, like, a coffee or espresso drink, and I'll go to sleep, and I'm fine. And that's probably true for quite a few people. Maybe they just are able to sleep. They're that tired or something, but they're not, but they're not getting that deep sleep. And that's pretty much across the board. I don't think anyone can really get away with sleep with having caffeine and then getting, a good quality sleep. So I
Right.
think people who tell themselves, "Oh, I sleep great after drinking coffee," I think might be sleeping, but maybe they're not great getting that deep quality sleep. And so I think they're probably not doing themselves any favors by continuing. And unfortunately, I know Justin
Right.
had this conversation. I know it's hard because when we do have those afternoon workouts and it helps you, it's so hard in the afternoon to get out and do a workout. So I get that. But I think like maybe trying to find some sort of alternative to caffeine might be that isn't going to be a stimulant, that isn't going to affect sleep, might be something to consider. But it delays sleep onset for some people. So that's some people take it and they can't fall asleep. That's kind of my problem is I have a really higher time getting to sleep, and then when I do get to sleep, I wake up and can't fall back asleep when I have coffee. So it's reducing that quality. So the deep sleep, increased wakefulness, which is exactly what I was saying. I'll wake up throughout the night. And because it has that half life, it just, even if you have a half life of only 3 hours, let's say you're like like a really fast metabolizer, it's only halfway consumed at 3 hours. You know what I mean? You still have
Right.
another 3 hours and it's halfway so thinking of half life is kind of a confusing concept, but it's like at 3 hours you still have whatever, still have caffeine in your system. And it's not until maybe 3 6 hours later that it's way reduced. And so
Hmm.
if you're taking it in the afternoon, even if you're a fast metabolizer, it's still affecting your sleep. It's still going to be in your system at night when you're trying to sleep. So just something to think about. And it can increase heart rate and just make it hard to relax. I know for me, I think that's what caffeine definitely notice. If I drink too much of it, I'm like, whoo, my heart, it's a
Right.
beat. And I can feel it beating. That's like probably when it's a little too much caffeine, but that might also impact the way we sleep. In the interest of the time we have, I don't want to deep dive into this caffeine and sleep, but I just want people to realize that it is impacting us when we have it in the afternoon.
The reason that we're concerned about sleep because as athletes, our progress and our growth doesn't derive from the sessions that we do. Our growth derives from the downtime. So the body repairs and recovers while we sleep rather than the body actually gaining fitness during the actual events like the training sessions, the races and all those sorts of things. So really the sleep process is where we start to see our performance gains and our gains in fitness. So if you are a typical triathlete, most of them, I would argue, is probably sleep deprived to a certain extent. I rarely ever get 7 to 8 hours of sleep and haven't for years. So not only are we getting fewer hours than really what we should, but the quality of those hours are less. And so you're really kind of burning the candle at both ends. So
Right.
if you're going to say, well, hey, I want my caffeine, then maybe what you have to do is you have to commit to getting more hours to compensate for the poor quality of sleep.
Yeah,
Now, whether that
maybe.
whether
I
that's going to
still
do
don't think
anything or
that's a good
not,
idea.
it'd be an interesting experiment just to see.
Yeah.
But you can't have your cake and eat it too on that one.
Right.
So
I would say my recommendation, if I were working with someone, is to please just don't just try. You're going to have to try to get through that afternoon workout without it if you can. And maybe you could try something like beetroot or something that's going to give you that little burst of maybe energy. Like I've tried, there's like an Organifi red powder that I've tried that's actually weirdly energetic. There's like stuff in it, but it's like mushrooms and things like that. I don't know. I tried that one time and that made me wired for my workout, and it didn't have caffeine. So, there might be other things out there that would have a similar effect that maybe would then also not affect your sleep. But I would have highly advised just trying not to drink caffeine in the afternoon because it's hard to have your cake and eat it too, I think, in that case. And I really think you're missing out on some of that recovery benefits if you're just
yeah.
drinking it in the afternoon. So I personally have a rule. Generally, definitely by 1 p.m., like in the afternoon, I'll be done with caffeine, but I try to be done by noon. with the drinking of it, because I do think I have a slow metabolizer. So even by 6 or 8 p.m., I probably still have some in my system. And I've even thought about just going through and doing another whole withdrawal process of like, this is really hard to do. So I'm not saying I would recommend this for anyone, but like to try to take it out of my system again and see how that impacts my sleep and do a whole experiment where if I'm going to do this, I probably ought to do it sooner than later because I'm going to start my marathon build and I don't know, like having some caffeine is helpful, but where I actually take, you do a whole thing where you take it out of your body, out of your system and you go through the caffeine withdrawal and it takes several days and then you sort of see how that affects you. Does that improve your sleep? Do you now feel better? That would be a big sign, like a big, oh, wow, this is actually something that's really impacting me negatively. And then you make that decision of how you add it back in. And can you add it like, I'm at this point where I could drink a couple pretty big cups of coffee throughout the morning, but I love coffee and it just makes me happy. But could I do like some decaffeinated coffee and only have 1 cup of caffeinated coffee and would that improve my sleep? So I think sometimes even doing like an experiment where you do a little bit of caffeine withdrawal could be beneficial. That's what I was talking about next. But I would say try to have like a cutoff point with caffeine if you can,
Mhm.
I would suggest by like 2 p.m. at the latest for most people is where you would want to cut that out of your diet or out of your system. But that maybe depends on when you go to bed too. But I just
Yeah,
say I don't think getting extra sleep, I don't know. I just think it's still going to be not the deep sleep because your deep sleep tends to happen kind of more early into this cycle anyway.
that's
Um,
true.
if you've
Yeah.
ever noticed that on your sleep trackers, usually it's kind of earlier in and then the most restful sleep happens earlier in the night and then it doesn't tend to happen later. So you just be getting more of that non-REM sleep or that non-deep sleep.
Hmm.
I'm not really like a sleep expert, so I don't want to dive into that, like REM versus deep versus all of that. But
Yep.
just think of it as sleep quality, like it's reducing that. So yeah, let's talk about caffeine withdrawal. Have you ever done that?
A
Where you?
complete shutdown of the
Hmm.
caffeine? No, I don't think I
No,
have.
I
The
did like.
protocol that I implemented this week was no caffeine after 2 p.m.
Okay,
So all of my
that's a good
evening
protocol.
sessions were
Yeah,
done
it's
caffeine
gonna be rough
free.
for a while,
I didn't
but you're
really
gonna get used to it.
notice I didn't
Okay.
notice any kind of decline in performance
Mm,
for the evening sessions,
mhm.
but those sessions tend to be all my strength work. So
Strength,
all of my
yeah.
aerobic conditioning tends to be done in the morning and the strength stuff is done in the evening. And I didn't really notice a decline,
Right.
whether
Well,
that means that, I
that's
was maybe
good.
less motivated or just tired. So it required some more internal dialogue to actually do the workouts. But I
Mhm.
had an all green week in Training Peak so far. So I got
There you
everything
go.
done.
You're noticing it's not causing a huge detriment.
So
It's just that
yeah, it didn't go as
motivation.
bad as I thought it could go.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
I'm
That's
kind of
positive.
interested to
Yeah.
see as I keep going with this protocol what's going to happen.
Yeah. It would be
Unless
great
I
if
have
what
such high stores of caffeine in me,
No, it doesn't
it never
store
really
like
the half-life never even kind of like I've never reached kind of like the complete depletion of it because I'm constantly
well,
feeding it, but that is
maybe as long as you're
interesting
not
though.
increasing your intake of it early in the day. I think as long as you're leaving that stable and then not
Right.
having that second dose later, I think you would notice it. But yeah, keep me posted. How do you feel
Yep.
like, because I think the big thing would be just that more energy during the day, and you start to notice, wow, I actually feel like I am sleeping better and my quality is better and therefore you maybe feel better during the morning sessions. And I can't say that those afternoon sessions are ever going to be like, super easy because I still struggle with that in the afternoon when I have to lift or something. But it's just that, yeah,
Hmm.
I have to just motivate myself with music and things like that. So I have to
Yeah.
use like external motivations. But yeah, the caffeine withdrawal, complete caffeine withdrawal. Some people do this before their races. So that I do know people who
Yeah.
will do a complete caffeine withdrawal and then that way when they consume caffeine during their race or before and during, they have maybe an added boost. But when I was looking through the research, I actually didn't find much that suggested that was actually helpful. So doing like a complete withdrawal and then taking it in on race day, I think there could be some maybe drawbacks to that because essentially then you're sort of starting out, you know, like, you're probably gonna be a little more sensitive to caffeine at that point because you've sort of gone through
Yeah,
this
that's what I was
withdrawal,
thinking.
and then maybe
Mm.
that would be backfire on you because you wouldn't unless you've done that during training and you kinda know, "Okay, when I've done the withdrawal and I start adding it in, I can have, like, 1 cup, and then I don't have to take as much caffeine in and I get the same benefits." But I think for most people, like, who are habitual caffeine users, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend that as a strategy before a race, because there doesn't seem to be much benefit to it. Of course, if you want to, if you notice that's helpful for you, do it. It's just hard. I think the biggest thing I learned when I did my caffeine withdrawal, this was years ago, where I actually did. Oh, you know what? No, I did. I did take it out when I was pregnant. I stopped drinking caffeine for a while. It wasn't because, like, you're allowed to have 1 cup, there was some other reason. I just didn't like coffee. I kind of like when my pregnancy, I had all these aversions, and it was coffee, I
Huh.
couldn't really drink it, and I just didn't drink caffeine for a while, but I had done this once before where I actually had some significant symptoms, like, it was like a flu. I felt like I had the flu. Let me just like, muscle aches, nausea,
Wow.
like, just, like, terrible feeling for, like, 2 days, and it says here, like, it can peak once you start taking it out, they begin, 12 to 24 hours, so that first day, you kind of feel crappy, but, towards the end of the first day and into, like, the 2nd day or 3rd day, I remember feeling like I had the flu, like, I didn't have,
Mm.
like, a fever or anything, but it was like, just kind of yeah, just kinda, like, crappy, just overall unwell for a couple of days. So it was rough, because I think you have to remember, like, like, this is where I think it's maybe I don't know if it's controversial, but I mean, caffeine is a drug, like, it is
Yeah. Yep.
so like other drugs, when we have a withdrawal from it, there's gonna be negative side effects. This may not last or be as I'm not even comparing caffeine withdrawal at all to, like, some of the more significant, like, drugs out there that maybe have really bad withdrawal symptoms where you have to be medically supervised. But this is bad, like, it's for a couple days, you're just not feeling well, and then it kinda starts to get better, so you have to just kinda get through those initial few days of feeling crappy. The one thing you can do is maybe just try to gradually reduce your intake, so go from, like, half caffeinated, half regular caffeinated coffee to, doing something like that, and then gradually increasing the uncaffeinated coffee until you get so you could do
Yeah.
a protocol that maybe helps read so you're just for me, it's I almost wonder when you do that if it's just, like, making the symptoms last, like, mildly for more time, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Where it's just like,
That's
"Why don't you
true.
just shut the Band-Aid off and just do this?"
Yeah.
But part of the reason I like coffee is just that ritual in the morning, so I'd have to almost find something believe me, when I went through this taking out caffeine, I tried everything under the sun that was supposed to be like coffee. So
Mhm.
I've tried, like, different rooibos teas, I've tried this, cocoa brewed cocoa, like, it's not hot cocoa, it's, like, brewed
Huh.
chocolate. I don't know what to say, and
Okay.
I've tried this other stuff that came from, like, the Maya some sort of nut, I don't remember what it's called, that supposedly came from, like, the Mayan rainforest, I don't know, somewhere in the rainforest, I don't know, some kind of nut that's supposed to taste like I don't know, I've tried all of these different options, and nothing in the world tastes quite like coffee. So, I I went down this whole thing when I did this taking out caffeine, so I was like, "If I could just find something that was like coffee." So, maybe decaf coffee does have a small amount of caffeine, but that might be the way to go if you're gonna do this and you still want that coffee in the morning, but it's hard, I mean, it can last 2 to 9 days of just feeling a little bit crappy, and then once you kinda get used to it and it's out of your system, then I would recommend leaving it out for a little bit to give yourself time for it all to for you to get used to non-caffeine, so maybe like a week or 2, and then maybe gradually add it back in. So
Yeah.
that's a protocol you could consider. I've thought about it because I do still struggle a bit with sleep, and I do wonder, like, is it because I'm such a slow metabolizer that the caffeine is impacting my sleep still? I don't know. Would
Mhm.
it make a huge difference? If you're curious, you just wanna kinda start with this fresh, like or, like, you don't wanna have any you just wanna, like, take it all out and then start fresh, it's an option, but I'm just warning you, it's gonna feel bad, and I don't recommend doing it necessarily as a protocol before your race because I mean, obviously, if you're feeling like this in the weeks leading up to your race, I'm not I mean, that might not be good either, right? You know,
I would
if you're
agree.
feeling these symptoms.
I from what I'm hearing so far, it almost sounds like any kind of manipulation of caffeine intake during the training process is generally maybe not a very good protocol to implement.
Yeah, you would
Because,
wanna do
you know,
yeah.
if you've gotten to the point now where you figured out your dosing during training that you plan on
Mhm,
using on race day, those doses have been determined at a
mhm,
caffeinated state. And so
right,
if you go
mhm,
through a whole process of reducing caffeine before your race day so that you get, quote unquote, more bang for your buck, what that's done now is it's basically increased your sensitivity to caffeine. And so if you've determined your doses under a caffeinated state and you start taking caffeine now under a cleaner state, it could has you could start to experience some of these unwelcome side effects
mhm.
during your race, which is absolutely not what you want.
Yeah,
So
absolutely
I
not.
would almost recommend, hey, if you're going to have a strategy that uses caffeine, you need to just stick with it.
Yeah,
Do it
or,
throughout
like,
the
if you
entire
to
training
do
process, no
a
withdrawal,
withdrawal,
no
yeah.
cutback. Just feed right into the race and then implement that strategy. Now,
Right,
if you want
absolutely,
to
that's
then quote unquote flush the system from caffeine, then wait until after race day takes place because then your
kinda
training
what I'd
volume is
suggest,
probably
yeah.
at your lowest. Depending on how you structured your race calendar. Now, if you've got, if you're this one of these things, like if you're racing back to back, this might be a strategy now that you don't want to consider. But if you find the point in a time where you're done racing and you've kind of like gone into your quote unquote off season, now would be a great time to consider, hey, now I'm going to flush the system. My training volume is at its lowest. Maybe my motivation is at my lowest because, I've just finished my race and now I've got, some downtime. Now is a great time where you can accept the consequences of the caffeine withdrawal, whether you're starting to feel nauseous and just kind of just generally under the weather,
Mhm.
then that would be a more acceptable time to experience that rather than trying to go through that process between races, before a race. It just sounds like there's just too much risk that would be involved because you spent so much time training and preparing for a race. Why jeopardize it just for caffeine's sake? And,
Right,
it just
yeah.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I don't think I would advise doing it before a race like you're saying. I think it'd be more something if you're curious on exactly how, you know, I don't know, how it may be affecting you, maybe even negatively, like sleep piece, and you really wanna flush the system out, that's better to do that, yeah, after the race or at a certain point when maybe your training is reduced a little bit or you're not in the even in the training process because I think it that those side effects could really make it hard for you to train, and get a good quality sessions in, so it's probably best to do that, not yeah, not during the full-on training cycle, and definitely not right before a race, so I wouldn't advise it, and I don't think the research I'll include there's some research articles that I found, and one of them did mention that there isn't much research or any sort of benefit that's been found to doing that anyways, so I don't think
Yeah.
I would advise it. So, I think I wanted to mention one thing too about hydration that we didn't talk about because I think that's a
Mhm.
common misconception. So,
Yeah. The
caffeine
diuretic effect.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's another side effect potentially, but it's actually a pretty mild diuretic, especially if you're used to
Mhm.
drinking it. So, I actually count the liquid from coffee into my liquid, daily liquid because it does have a diuretic effect, but it's not as potent as say like alcohol is a very potent diuretic and as
Yeah.
we know if you drink alcohol you definitely are dehydrated. There's a little bit less of that with coffee. So as long as you're not drinking like a whole pot of coffee every day, I think the more you drink the more it becomes an issue. You're probably okay. So that's a bit of a myth. Um I wouldn't be too worried about it if you want to, offset it a little bit, maybe drink a little more fluid with it, with the coffee, and you will have to pee. It is gonna for me, I do notice that, like, if I drink the coffee and then go for a run, it definitely does have a little bit of that effect of like, "Oh, I've gotta pee," you know what I mean? Like, so
Mhm.
it does it, but it's not so potent. So it's not something I would generally spend a lot of time worrying too much about as long as you're getting enough fluid from other sources water and other drink sources that are going to give you fluids that aren't don't have diuretic properties, so don't include alcohol, then I would say you're probably okay, unless you're drinking several cups of coffee. So don't
Yeah.
worry about that too much. That's the only other thing I think I had in here that I wanted to cover with caffeine, and I know we're kind of close to the hour.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing that I could think of would just be, you have a note down here. It's like the actual protocols that we could use.
Well, I mean, we
Whether
talked
we
about
might
it a
want to
little bit,
save
yeah.
that as like a deep dive, we can kind of come back to it and say, we can come up with a couple different scenarios on how to
Mm,
spread a caffeine dose over the course of a race, to make sure that it's evenly distributed and you're taking it in at a particular point in time in the race where it's needed the most, and you're not needlessly bringing it in. I know
right.
selfishly that is a conversation that I would like to have
Okay. We could
as
do
as
that.
I
Yeah,
kind of
maybe.
go into a new race season. I'm looking back at some of my previous protocols and say, well, has what I've been doing, is that optimal? Can I do something that's different that might be able to give me better performance without the increase in fatigue? Because we know that caffeine is going to mask that fatigue. So what I want to do is, during a long event, I want to mask this fatigue as long as possible,
Right.
so that I remain focused and strong and I feel good. But
Mhm.
the question becomes, is like, okay, well then, can I change the protocol where I still feel good and I'm getting still good performance, or if not better performance, and just find a better strategy? So that might be something that we can kind of come up with for a deep dive. You just
Yeah.
take a couple of different scenarios of, athletes of different weights, and say, well, here's the range of caffeine that we're looking at. This is the duration of the race that we're going to do in this scenario. This is how you might want to spread this out, and kind of give some ideas and tips.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
think
that
that
would
that would be
I
a
think that
valuable
would be an
conversation.
interesting deep dive. I'll have to note it and put it in my notes for that because I have a
Yeah.
few different ideas for those deep dives. So, yeah, kind of more of like a very into like, here's example, like, okay, here's very specific examples, and this is what, somebody could try. And maybe even base it a little bit off a weight or a different, like a few different examples for a similar type of race or something like that. Just kind of diving into
Hmm.
that. Yeah. But that would be, I think, a separate like deep dive
Yeah.
because I could just go into each example and yeah, kind of dive into it more. So I think in terms of like the caffeine piece, I think probably a lot of people maybe already knew a little bit, like, most of us know what coffee does to us, but I think just kind of deep diving into it a little bit more. I think the sleep piece and the thinking about the withdrawal and actually taking the caffeine out and when to do that and if you
Hmm.
should even do that is important, because I do hear a lot of athletes sort of doing that protocol before races, and I always wonder, is it helpful? I don't know if it seems like a lot of something to go through something kind of challenging like right before a
Yeah.
race. And yeah, some of the like dosing there. And then I think just kind of leaving it with it is a bit individual. So if you're very curious, there are genetic tests that you can do to look at if you're a fast or slow metabolizer. There's just different genes that impact that. So you can actually do, I don't know, obviously there's some controversy with like 23andMe, but I believe there are other avenues you can go down to do some of those,
Mm.
you know, testing it if you're really curious about it.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, this has been a good I think this has been a good conversation for somebody who's maybe new to endurance sports.
Right.
Somebody who's
Yeah.
maybe never considered, using caffeine, and they're still trying to figure things out, and they've spent all their time trying to figure out what workouts they should be doing. Just this kind of introduction, say, hey, if there's more than one way to increase performance.
Mhm.
This is one valid way of doing it. And so, but it also is a good reminder for some of those experienced athletes who have been out there. And if you've ever been out on the course and you've seen, the Coke bottles, the Coke at aid stations, maybe later on into a race, this is one of the reasons why they use this, is not
Mhm.
just the sugar bust that you get from the Coke, but there is a level of caffeine that is in each of those. And so when you go through the aid station, you're taking in the Coke. that's what you're doing, is you're taking in little bits of caffeine, little bits of sugar. And so there's multiple uses for this. So I think this is a good reminder for experienced athletes on why it is that they do what they do. What are some of the purposes that aid stations are set up the way that they are? And for the newbie that's out there, just one more thing to consider and to think about, in their endurance journey while they're looking to increase performance and gain fitness. So I think this basically covers the topic. We've talked about some potential follow-ups to this, and I'm excited to search this a little bit further. So
Yeah.
I think this polishes.
I might also
yeah.
see if I can include like a link to like if I can find a good one of different serving sizes of different things and different types of coffees and all, different things that might have caffeine and how much caffeine is in them too. I don't know if that would be helpful. Like, Coca-Cola has 12 ounces, says 46 milligrams, so, those types of things have some caffeine. And so if you're kind of thinking of even trying to figure out how much you're having throughout the day, that might be a resource, to kind of start putting that together. And if having chocolate, like I do like chocolate, there is a little bit of caffeine in there.
Yeah.
So those are sneaky things. And that's something sometimes I do at night is have a dark chocolate. And I'm thinking, I wonder if I shouldn't do that. It's just a little bit. It's
as
like,
you lay awake staring at the ceiling.
right, yeah, exactly, so it kinda gets I think it's just kinda gets me thinking too a little bit about, okay, there's these little hidden not hidden things, but things that do have caffeine that we sometimes even take in at night, and if you're extra sensitive to being aware of that and maybe just trying to if you don't wanna do a full withdrawal, even just having that goal of, "Okay, I'm gonna try to do no caffeine after noon," and I mean no caffeine, no cola, no Red Bulls obviously have caffeine, but, like, chocolate even, maybe there's or even a green tea is only 30 milligrams, but, if you're sensitive and that's affecting your sleep, so maybe even
Yeah.
that might be helpful to sort of have a list of everything. What does have caffeine and how much? That might be helpful for people. So
That'd be
you can
great.
start thinking about your intake a little bit more and how much you're getting throughout the day.
So
So,
that might
yeah.
be some information that we can post on
Yeah.
our Instagram
Yeah, I
feed.
might put something
So we can turn
together.
that into a graphic. So if you are not following the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast on Instagram, jump on out there. We will consider posting some of this additional content and information out on those sources as well. So I think this wraps it up. So this has been episode 69 on caffeine and its use by endurance athletes in training and racing. So we want to thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate the time that you spend and support that you continue to show to the podcast. We know that you have an ocean filled of different podcasts that you have available at your fingertips. And so by you clicking on this and consuming our content, it is greatly appreciated and does not go unnoticed. We thank you so much for that. Again, join the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group on Facebook to continue to grow the community and connect with others as well, where we can learn and grow from each other. We, again, thank you. If you have enjoyed the content that we've come out with and the topics that we cover, you can go back and you can check out our entire library. As I said, we've got 69 prior episodes. So go check out the library if this is just your first time listening. We have tons of other topics and discussions out there that can greatly help you, I believe, on your journey. So check those out. There's a link to the library in the bio of the Endurance Athlete Journey page on Facebook and on Instagram, so you can find those easily. Leave a comment and a review if you found this helpful. Those are greatly appreciated as well. So thank you guys so much for joining. I've been your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie from the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you again later. That wraps up today's episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Endurance sports have a way of teaching us patience, humility, and resilience, lessons that carry far beyond the workout. Progress in endurance sports doesn't come from shortcuts. It comes from consistency, discipline, and doing the work when it's not glamorous. Wherever you are on your endurance journey, keep trusting the process and honoring the work you put in each day. If today's episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone to help on their endurance journey. Don't forget to join the conversation on our social sites to help build and foster a community where we all learn and support one another. We'll be back with more stories and insights from Coach Justin and Katie. Until then, visit the podcast website at theenduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com for more episodes from the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Feel free to send us an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularasaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.